The winter wind slipped through the cracks of Ginny's hut like an uninvited thief, biting at her skin and rattling the pots that hung on the bare wall. She sat on the floor with her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the tiny pot of boiled water that was supposed to pass for dinner. Her 2 children, Subin and Minho, sat beside her, their eyes sunken, their cheeks hollow, their bodies wrapped in ragged blankets that barely kept out the cold. Hunger had become so constant, so sharp, that it no longer felt like penance, felt like emptiness, like a black hole inside them that swallowed every ounce of strength. Every month, she walked miles to the ration station, standing in endless lines beneath portraits of the leader. Soldiers shouted at the starving crowd, handing out pitiful handfuls of cornmeal that could never last 30 days. She had learned how to stretch it, how to grind weeds into the porridge and strip bark from trees for tea. But still, her children's stomachs growled at night, and their lips quivered in sleep, whispering dreams of food they had never even tasted. That morning she had done what no mother was supposed to do. She saved a fistful of rice from the ration, tying it in an old cloth and slipping it beneath a loose floorboard. It was barely enough to fill half a bowl, but to her, it was a treasure greater than gold. She knew the law. Hiding rations was a betrayal of the leader, a crime against the state. If caught, she would be dragged away, beaten, humiliated, or worse. Yet, as she watched her children's thin arms and heard Minho's weak cough, she could not think of the law. She thought only of survival. Janae pressed her palm against the floorboard now, feeling the hidden pouch beneath. Her heart raced at the thought of soldiers storming in, tearing her home apart. But in the silence of that hut, with her children's hollow eyes fixed on her, she knew she would do it again. Starvation was the regime's punishment for being born ordinary. But she was not willing to let it steal the last breath from her children, not without a fight. The next morning, Jeannie's hands trembled as she lifted the loose floorboard. The tiny bundle of rice lay hidden in the shadows like a forbidden secret. She touched the cloth, whispering a silent prayer no one would ever hear. In a country where neighbors reported neighbors and even children were taught to inform on their parents, trust was a luxury too dangerous to afford. Her daughter, Subin, watched her carefully. At only 12 years old, the girl already carried the seriousness of an adult. Her eyes were dark pools of worry, reflecting years of hunger and silence. "Mother," she whispered, "what if someone finds out?" Janae forced a smile, though fear knotted her chest. "They won't," she said softly. "This is for you and your brother. Remember, never speak of it, not even to your friends." Aside, the sound of boots striking the dirt echoed down the narrow alley. A group of Korean soldiers marched past, their rifles glinting in the weak sunlight. Everyone in the neighborhood froze when they appeared, lowering their heads, bowing in forced respect. Janae pressed her children against the wall until the footsteps faded. Only then did she breathe again. At the ration station later that day, she saw how dangerous her act had been. Posters screamed loyalty to the leader, and loudspeakers blared songs of devotion. A woman in line whispered that her cousin had been dragged away for stealing a handful of corn. Another man vanished after someone claimed he was hoarding flour. Rumors spread like wildfire, but they all ended the same way: disappearance. As Janae clutched her pitiful share of cornmeal, she felt the weight of her secret rice pulling on her soul. Every step home was filled with dread. She glanced over her shoulder, convinced that someone had noticed, that someone had followed. The fear of punishment gnawed at her as much as hunger. That night, she sat by the flickering candle, staring at her children asleep on the frozen floor. Minho's breathing was shallow, Subin's arms curled protectively around him. Janae pressed her hand to the floorboard once more. It was more than rice. It was defiance, love, and risk bundled together. In a land where survival itself was treason, Janae had crossed a line she could never uncross. The neighborhood in Chongjin was a cage without bars. Every house leaned on the other, every window was an eye, every whisper carried weight. Janae knew the walls themselves seemed to listen. In North Korea, betrayal often wore the face of a neighbor. She walked to fetch water from the communal pump, keeping her head down. Around her, conversations sounded normal: trading rumors of factory closures, the latest speech on the radio, but beneath every word was suspicion. Who was loyal? Who was desperate enough to report another for an extra bowl of rice? She could never tell. Mrs. Kang, the widow across the alley, lingered by the pump too long. Her sharp gaze seemed to cut through Jeannie's clothes, her skin right down to the gilt buried under her floorboard. Jin'ei forced a polite smile, but her lips trembled. Mrs. Kang had already denounced her own brother for hoarding corn once. It had earned her rations for a month, and the hollow fear of everyone around her. At night, the sounds were worse: the shuffle of boots, the knock on doors, the muted sobs as families disappeared into the dark. Jinny's children clung to her whenever the echoes came near, and her heart hammered with each passing patrol. She wondered if her neighbors could hear it too. One evening, Subin returned late from school, eyes wide. She whispered to her mother that their teacher had warned them. "If your parents hide food, tell us. The leader will reward you for your loyalty." The words stung like a knife. Jin'ei hugged her daughter tightly, masking her panic. She could not let her children become the tools of her undoing. The rice under the floor seemed louder now, heavier. Every creak of wood, every suspicious glance, every whisper from her children became a reminder of the danger she had created. Jin'ei began moving more carefully, speaking less, teaching her children silence as if it were the only language that could keep them alive. Yet in the stillness of the night, she felt it, the invisible eyes of the regime pressing in, searching for her weakness. And she knew it was only a matter of time before someone noticed. The morning started with footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and too synchronized to be neighbors. Jin'ei froze as a fist thundered against her wooden door. Her children leapt to her side, their tiny fingers clutching her clothes. The voice outside was sharp, cold, unmistakable. "Open." Ministry inspection. Her blood turned to ice. She pressed her trembling hands against the floorboards where the rice lay hidden, as though her touch could silence it. With no time left, she stood and pulled the door open. 3 Korean soldiers entered, boots scraping the dirt floor. Their uniforms smelled of damp wool and tobacco, their expressions carved from stone. Behind them, Mrs. Kong stood watching, her narrow face smug with satisfaction. Jeannie's stomach drop. Betrayal had found her. The soldiers tore through the room with mechanical cruelty. They lifted blankets, overturned bowls, thrust knives into the thatched mats. Her children huddled in the corner, eyes wide with terror. Jin'ei wanted to shield them, but her own body felt as fragile as paper. When the floorboard creaked, one soldier grinned, knelt, pried the wood open, and pulled out the sack of rice. For a heartbeat, the room was silent, only the sound of grains spilling like 1,000 tiny betrayals onto the dirt floor. The soldier's voice was almost mocking. "So, loyal mother feeds her family better than the leader allows." Laughter followed. They dragged Jin'ei outside, shoving her into the street where neighbors had already gathered. Faces she had known all her life stared back at her, with a mixture of fear, pity, and relief that it wasn't them. Subin cried out, clutching at her mother's skirt until a soldier struck the child aside with the back of his hand. Jin'ei screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the boots stomping her down. "Punishment will teach you," one soldier hissed as they bound her wrists. The crowd was forced to watch. Public humiliation was part of the ritual, part of the control. Guinea's tears burned, but she bit them back. She could not give them the satisfaction of seeing her weep. And yet as her children's sobs filled the square, she wondered if silence could save her or if it was already too late. They locked Jin'ei in a concrete cell that stank of mold, rust, and despair. The air was thick with dampness, the kind that clung to her skin and bones. Her wrists ached where the rope had rubbed her raw, and every breath tasted like dust. But the worst was the silence broken only when the metal door clanged open.
The guards did not speak much. They didn't need to.
Each time they appeared, they placed a small bowl on the floor, sometimes filled with murky broth, sometimes nothing but a handful of corn husks. Never enough to fill her stomach, only enough to keep her alive in pain. Hunger became her enemy, gnawing at her from the inside, whispering through every empty hour. Days blurred. Her thoughts slowed. She tried to pray silently, not to God she had long been told he didn't exist, but to her children. In the darkness, she whispered Subin's name, Sungho's name, as though repeating them might anchor her to life. One night, she dreamed of rice, steaming fragrant, the kind she had once shared with her children during better years. She woke biting her own hand, ashamed of the hunger that made her hallucinate. But the regime knew exactly what they were doing.
Ow.
Hunger was their sharpest weapon. A starving body obeys faster than a beaten one. A mother stripped of strength cannot resist, cannot protect, cannot defy. Occasionally, they dragged her out to stand in the square, her hair matted, her cheeks hollow. They forced her to bow before neighbors, calling her traitor, making an example of her. Children who once played with Subin were now ordered to throw stones at Ginny's feet. Each pebble felt heavier than a blade, for it carried shame deeper than pain. And yet inside her, something stubborn survived. Each time a grain of corn touched her tongue, she didn't think of herself. She thought of her children's thin faces, waiting, depending, still alive somewhere. Hunger could take her body, but not her reason to endure. When the soldiers whispered of re-education camp, Janae felt dread coil in her stomach, but beneath it, a dangerous spark lit in her mind. If she survived this, maybe she could still find a way to protect them. Subin sat cross-legged on the cold wooden floor of her grandmother's hut, staring at the single candle that burned against the shadows. She was only 12, but her face already carried the hollowness of hunger and the stiffness of fear. Ever since her mother's arrest, neighbors avoided them. Even children she once played with now looked at her like she carried disease. Some whispered, her mother betrayed the state, their voices sharp enough to cut. Teachers watched her closely in school, scanning her face during every pledge, every chant for the leader. If her smile faltered, if her bow wasn't deep enough, punishment would fall, not only on her, but on her grandmother too. One evening, Korean soldiers came. Their boots thundered against the fragile earth's floor as they demanded answers. What do you know of your mother's crime? Who helped her? Where's the hidden rice? Subin trembled. She wanted to scream that her mother only wanted to feed them, that there was no crime in love. But her grandmother's grip on her hand was iron, warning her. Silence is survival. When the soldiers left, Subin cried quietly into her grandmother's lap. Why didn't we help her? Why didn't we tell the truth? The old woman stroked her hair with trembling fingers. Child, in this country, truth is death. Silence keeps us alive. Days turned into weeks, and Subin learned the weight of that lesson. In class, when the teacher mocked her mother, she did not flinch. When children spat near her feet, she lowered her eyes. And at night, when her little brother Sung-ho asked, "When will Mama come home?" she forced herself to smile, though her chest ached with the lie. But the silence was not emptiness. Inside her it grew into a shield. Each unspoken word became a secret vow, that one day when she could, she would find a way to bring her family back together. For now, she bowed, she smiled, she endured. Yet behind her lowered eyes, a fire quietly flickered, fragile, hidden, but alive. The winter winds sharpened, biting through the walls of the hut like knives. Subin and her little brother Sung-ho lay under a thin blanket, their bellies growling with the ache of emptiness. Their grandmother coughed endlessly at night, her ribs jutting out like broken branches. The state's rations had grown smaller with each week, barely a handful of cornmeal, never enough for 4 mouths. It was on one of those nights that the knock came. A Korean soldier stood at the door, his face hidden beneath his fur hat. He asked for Subin by name. She stepped forward timidly, trembling. The soldier knelt to her level, his voice low and coaxing. "Tell us where your mother hid the rice. You're innocent, but if you stay silent, your family will starve." Subin's lips quivered. She shook her head. But then he dangled a small cloth pouch. Inside was a warm bun of wheat bread. The smell drifted into the hut, intoxicating. Sung-ho's wide eyes fixed on it, his little hands reaching. For days, Subin fought the temptation, yet hunger gnawed at her bones louder than her grandmother's whispered warnings. On the 5th day, when Sung-ho collapsed in the snow while searching for firewood, she broke. She led the Korean soldiers to the broken fence behind the house, where once long ago, her mother had hidden scraps of rice. She knew it was empty now, but she hoped it would satisfy them. The soldiers dug and found nothing. Their eyes turned cold. "You lied." They left her trembling, the bread untouched in her hand. But the damage was done. Neighbors soon whispered that Subin had spoken to the soldiers. At school, the teacher smirked while announcing that even children betray blood when loyalty to the leader is tested. That night, Subin held her brother as he slept, tears soaking her cheeks. She had tried to save him, but instead she had condemned her mother further. The betrayal hung heavy in her chest, a stone she would carry forever. Yet deep within, another vow formed. If she had already betrayed once, she would not betray again. Next time, no matter the hunger, no matter the fear, she would resist. In the gray cell that smelled of rust and damp straw, Janae counted the days by scratching faint lines into the wall with a splinter of stone. Her body was weak from thin gruel and constant interrogations, but her spirit clung desperately to thoughts of Subane and Sung-ho. One morning, 2 Korean soldiers dragged her into the questioning chamber. Their boots echoed against the cement floor. On the table lay a file. The officer flipped it open and spoke casually, as if savoring the moment. "Your daughter told us about your rice stash. Children are honest when they're hungry." The words pierced Janae deeper than any beating. Her breath caught, her hands trembling as she imagined Subin's small face, her frightened eyes. At first, grief washed over her grief, not for herself, but for the unbearable guilt her daughter must now carry. The soldier leaned closer. "Your blood betrays you. Even your family sees the futility of resisting the state." But instead of breaking, Janae lifted her head. Her voice, though hoarse, was steady. "No, my daughter is just a child. It is hunger that betrayed me, not her. If you think this makes me weaker, you are wrong." For the first time, the interrogator faltered, irritated by her calm defiance. They beat her, but she refused to cry out. Her heart had turned into iron, back in her cell. Janae pressed her forehead against the wall, whispering as if Subin could hear through the stone. "I forgive you. Do not carry this burden. Survive. Live beyond this darkness." In that moment, a transformation occurred. She realized survival was no longer only for herself, it was for her children. If she gave in, her daughter would believe her betrayal had destroyed everything. If she endured, Subin might one day see that mistakes can be redeemed with courage. Though the walls closed in and her body withered, Ginny's spirit blazed with a new purpose. The guards had expected her to collapse under the sting of betrayal. Instead, betrayal had forged her resolve. She would endure every lash, every hunger pang, not in silence, but in defiance. The prison nights were the cruelest. Cold air slithered through broken windows, rats scurried across the damp floor, and the moans of other prisoners echoed like ghosts. Janae lay awake, her ribs aching from hunger. She whispered Subin's name into the darkness, promising silently that she would not die here. Then, one stormy night, chaos erupted. A group of prisoners from another block had staged a fight. The guards rushed to beat them into silence, leaving only one inexperienced Korean soldier to patrol Jeannie's corridor. He paced nervously, his flashlight beam trembling in the dark. When thunder rattled the walls, the power flickered and died. The corridor plunged into shadows. In that instant, the soldier fumbled with his keys, dropping them near the bars of Ginny's cell. Her heart pounded like a drum. For a long moment, she froze. The risk was enormous if caught. She would be executed on the spot. But another voice inside her whispered, "This is the chance. Take it for Subin, for Sung-ho." With trembling hands, Janae reached through the rusted bars. The metal scraped her skin as her fingers brushed against the keys. She pulled them closer, praying the soldier wouldn't notice. Another flash of lightning lit the hall, and he turned, suspicious. She yanked her hand back just in time. The storm grew louder, masking the sound of metal sliding into the lock. Slowly she turned the key. The door clicked open. Her breath-caught freedom was one step away. She slipped into the corridor, crouching low, her bare feet silent against the cold floor. Every second stretched like eternity. The soldier's back was turned, his attention fixed on the distant shouting. Ginny's pulse roared in her ears as she crept past him. She could almost smell the rain outside, feel the pull of the world beyond these walls. But then a prisoner in the next cell whispered hoarsely, "Take me with you." The sound sliced the silence. The soldier spun around, his flashlight beam cutting across the hall. Janae froze, her body caught between shadow and light. Would she risk everything to keep going, or be dragged back into the nightmare she dared to escape? The soldier's flashlight burned into Ginny's face. For a split second the world stopped. Her legs felt like stone, her throat dry as dust. Then instinct took over, she ran. Bare feet pounded the concrete, her thin frame darting through shadows like a hunted animal. Shouts erupted behind her. "Stop." The soldier's boots thundered after her, the beam of light swinging wildly. Ginny's breath tore from her chest, each inhale sharp with pain, but she didn't stop. Ahead, a door hung ajar. The storm outside howled through its cracks like an invitation. She slammed into it with all her strength, stumbling into the rain-soaked night. Cold water drenched her thin prison clothes, lightning carving the sky above. For the first time in years, she saw the horizon beyond the camp walls. For the first time, she felt the wild taste of freedom. But the gunshot came like thunder. The bullet struck the mud inches from her feet. She fell to her knees, splashing in the muck. The soldier had caught up, weapon aimed, his eyes wide with panic and rage. Janae raised her trembling hands. "Please, I just want to see my daughter," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the storm. For a heartbeat, the soldier's hand shook. He was young, barely older than Subin. Perhaps he too had a mother who prayed for him in the dark. Another shout came from the prison yard. Other guards were approaching. If they found her, torture would be certain. There was no more time. Ginny's eyes darted to the gap in the barbed wire fence just meters away, twisted loose by the storm. Freedom was so close she could feel it. Her heart surged with one last desperate strength. She thought of Subin's hollow cheeks, Sungho's tired eyes, the promise she had made to survive. She lunged forward. The soldier shouted, raising his gun again, but lightning split the sky, blinding them both. Janae dove into the mud, scrambling toward the fence. Her hands tore against the wire, blood mixing with rain, but she forced herself through. Behind her, voices roared. Ahead, the open fields stretched endlessly. She didn't know if she would make it far. She didn't know if she'd live another day. But as the storm swallowed her, Janae smiled for the first time in years, because in that moment, she was free.